Hello and welcome to another episode on our grim journey together into the dark tales of the medieval era. Today we will be looking at the Three Journeymen, or the Three Apprentices, depending on which country you're from. It was first published in 1815 in the second volume of the Children's and Household Tales by the Brothers Grimm. Similar stories exist in both French and Hungarian folklore. The earliest known written story that resembles the Three Journeymen is about three Welshmen who only know one phrase in English. It is included in the work Summa Predicantium by the 14th century English friar John Bromyard, which was first printed in 1484. Just for relatability, that is when Richard III was King of England. This is one of the shorter stories in the collection, so as always I will be embellishing it a little bit, but not that much, as I tell it to you and as we discuss it. So our tale opens with three journeymen who were great friends and had agreed to stay together through thick and thin and always work in the same city, if not always work in the same house. But after a while, their masters could no longer pay their wages and they were reduced to poverty, living in rags and eating scraps. They decided to meet and talk about their dire situation, as it really couldn't continue, and they agreed that they couldn't stay where they were and that they should set out to find work in another city, but always journey together, and if they couldn't find work in the next city, then they would agree to part forever. While they were talking, a richly clothed gentleman came up to them and asked who they were. Why they would tell a complete stranger their business, you just don't. They told him that they were down on their luck and looking for work and didn't want to be parted because they were such great friends and had managed to stay together through thick and thin, and they didn't want this lack of funds to ruin their friendship and have them part forever. The man said that there would be no need for that, and if they do as he said, they would have great riches and never have to work again. They would get to ride around in carriages. They were listening, but to me it all sounds a bit too good to be true, to be honest. They said to him that as long as they wouldn't be endangering their souls and their salvation, then they would do whatever he wanted. That's a very large scope. And the gentleman agreed that he would make absolutely no claim on either of their souls. However, one of the journeymen, one of the three friends, had been looking at the man's feet. He might have liked the look of his shoes, when he caught sight of a horse's hoof and a human foot. And when he caught sight of the horse's hoof and the human foot, he said that he didn't want to have anything to do with him, didn't want to make a deal, and that he was just going to go on his merry way. The journeyman was correct in his assessment, and the devil turned to him and said, "But the devil said, 'You have nothing to fear. I'm not interested in your soul, but in someone else's, and he's already half mine, and his time is about to run out.'" Since they now felt safe, they agreed to the devil's proposal, and he told them what he wanted them to do. The first journeyman was to answer every question with, "All three of us." The second with, "For money." The third with, "That's all right." These answers were to be given one after the other, but the men were not allowed to say anything else. If they didn't follow the devil's instructions, then all their money would disappear immediately, but as long as they followed them, their pockets would always be full. Talk about a deal with the devil. But, if all you had to do was to have riches for the rest of your life, but you were only allowed to say 3 phrases, that doesn't seem too bad so far. Although I do have to point out that most deals done with the devil do end badly for everybody involved and everybody associated with them, except for the devil himself, which is a lucrative business move on his part. Although there was that one blip at the crossroads with the fiddle. Yeah, that didn't repeat itself. The devil filled their pockets with gold coins and directed them to which inn they were to stay at in the next city. They were to stay there and not move until he gave them further instructions. When they got to the inn, the innkeeper went to their table and asked them what they wanted to eat and what they wanted to drink, and they answered in the way that they had been instructed. For all three of them, for money, and that's all right. And the innkeeper tutted and probably looked at them like they were a bit puddled, but brought them the good food and drink of the house. They'd ate their fill, drank their fill, and when the innkeeper came with the bill, they again answered as the devil had instructed them. All three of us, for money, and that's all right. They paid him, but gave him much more money than the bill actually was. You wouldn't get away with that in Yorkshire. Wouldn't happen. They paid him, but they paid much more than the bill actually came to, and when the other guests saw this, as they were flashing it about a bit, they thought that they must be, all three of them, very, very crazy. Which anybody would be for paying the over the odds for anything and only saying no more than 3 phrases at all. The journeyman stayed at the inn and in all that time said no more than the 3 phrases that they had been instructed to do. All three of us, for money, and that's all right. What they did was they watched in silence everything that went on in the inn, who came, who went, who spoke to, what they were doing, and because most people thought that they were crazy, they took no notice of them, and probably some of them took pains to actively avoid them. But they ended up knowing everything that happened within those walls. Now one day, this was quite a busy inn on the main thoroughfare of a big city, and one day a great merchant entered the inn carrying a lot of money. I mean, these people just throw coins around, they're just wanting to get robbed, to be quite honest. Has no one ever heard of a highwayman, to be honest? Has no one ever heard of that? They're just asking to get robbed and clunked over the head, in my opinion. I mean, I'd freaking clonk them for cash. He said to the innkeeper to keep his money safe, as he had heard about the 3 crazies that kept their time in his bar, and he didn't trust them with his money. They thought he was going to get robbed. I mean, if he goes around thinking that he's going to get robbed, then why is he flashing the cash in the first place? But he didn't trust them, and the guests told him not to trust them because they were crazy after all. They were absolutely crackers. They could only say 3 phrases, and that is all they had said to anybody that had spoke to them. As the innkeeper carried the bag to a safe place, he felt all the gold coins inside. The bag was very, very heavy. The innkeeper moved the journeymen from their room to a downstairs room, and he moved the merchant to a special bedroom that was upstairs, away from all the riffraff. But as the clock struck midnight, and everybody was sound asleep, and the inn was quiet, the innkeeper and his wife took an axe and went to the merchant's room and beat him to death, took his gold, and went back to bed, where they slept soundly for the rest of the night. The next morning, of course, the merchant's body was discovered swimming in his own blood in his own bed, and all the guests gathered, and the innkeeper said to them that he didn't believe any of the normal guests could have done such a heinous crime, and it must be the 3 crazy guys that had done it, no matter how long that they had stayed in the inn and they hadn't killed anyone before, but it had to be them. And the other guests agreed with him. I mean, nobody actually saw this thing take place, but yeah, they all agreed that it was the 3 crazy guys that must have killed this guy, blunt force traumatized him in his bed with an axe, although if you were going to use an axe, you might as well chop the bloke up just for shits and giggles. The innkeeper summoned the 3 journeymen out of their room because nobody had gone to get them, and I think people were probably a bit scared of them, and asked them point blank if they had killed the merchant. They, of course, only answered what they had agreed to, which was all 3 of them for money, and that's all right. The other guests were horrified at this, and they, of course, were taken to the prison and were to be put on trial for their crime. Now, it was only at this point that they saw that things were getting a little bit out of hand, a little bit serious. I mean, they were in a jail cell, could only say 3 phrases, and were about to be put on trial for a murder that everybody in the inn had said that they had committed. There was no evidence. You didn't deal in evidence. They dealt in hearsay, and right now all the fingers were pointing to those three, because they were a bit crackers. And they became very afraid. The devil reappeared to them that night and said to hold out just one more day. They were so close, and they shouldn't throw away all the luck that they had built up so far in only saying the three phrases and not even deviating from their path once. And they were not to worry, and not a hair on their heads would be touched. I mean, you can unalive somebody without touching their hair. I'm just saying. I haven't done it. I'm just saying you can unalive people without touching their hair, so the devil's quite untrustworthy, but then I suppose he is the devil and is not exactly a saint. The next morning they were brought before a court and a judge, and things were looking very, very bad for them. The judge asked them, "Are you murderers?" They answered, "All three of us." The judge said, "Why did you kill him?" They answered, "For money." And the judge was outraged at this blatant acknowledgement of the crime and the life that they had taken. And he said, "Didn't you dread committing such a crime?" And they answered, "It's all right." And the judge was sickened by it. He said, "They've confessed. They're absolutely unrepentant at the crime they've done. They're gonna die. Take them outside and execute them." The three journeymen were dragged outside to the gallows, and the innkeeper had to stand with the witnesses. The witnesses all had to stay and see true justice done. The executioner's assistants took hold of each of them and led them up the scaffold steps to where the executioner was waiting, hooded, with his bare sword in his hand. Just when the situation looked very, very bleak for the journeymen, I mean, they were about to be executed after all for a crime they didn't commit, just then a coach drawn by 4 blood-red foxes approached and was moving so fast that sparks flew from the wheels and the pavement, and someone was waving a white flag from the window, and the executioner paused on the scaffold and exclaimed that it could only mean that a pardon for them was coming. The coach door opened, and the devil, dressed in splendid fashion as a distinguished gentleman, stepped from the coach and said that the 3 men were innocent, and they could now tell what they had seen and what they had heard. The pact was over. The oldest turned to the witnesses and said, "We didn't kill the merchant. The murderer is standing amongst you." He pointed to the innkeeper and said, "He killed the merchant, and he's not the only one. He's got bodies hanging in his cellar of people that he's killed and robbed. He's a murderer, and he deserves to die." The judge didn't really believe them at first, so he sent his apprentices to go to the inn cellar to find out for themselves. When they opened the cellar door, all they saw were skeletons, partially rotting corpses, fresh ones with blood still dripping into the gully below. And they returned to the judge and they told him what they had seen. When they reported this all to the judge ordered that the innkeeper be taken up to the scaffold and that his head was to be separated from his body for the crimes that he had committed, without a trial. The devil turned to the 3 journeymen who had helped him in this endeavour and said to them, "I now have the soul I wanted. He's mine. You 3 are free to go live your lives, and you will have as much money as you could want. You will never want for anything." And with that, he disappeared. Now, you could say that the 3 journeymen went and lived their lives happily, merrily, and could spend whatever they liked. However, when you make a deal with the devil, you don't get off scot-free, and nothing is mentioned about what happens to the Journeymen's souls when they eventually die. Will they be accepted to heaven after having a pact with Satan himself and leading another man to his death, even though that man was a serial killer after all? Or, due to their pact, will their souls be tainted and claimed by the devil himself on their day of judgment? I like to think that last part. And that is where we end it for today. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, a comment, and please subscribe if you haven't already. And keep reading. I will see you next time.